Hey guys, you're here with Bo, and in this video we're going to look at what we know so far about what's happened with Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash. Now, if you don't know, or you haven't been watching the markets in the last sort of 24 hours to 48 hours, there's been an enormous spike in the value of Bitcoin Cash, and Bitcoin itself has been dropping in price, and quite rapidly, to say the least. Now, as of today, there's been a bit of a pullback, but what we're going to do is we're going to examine exactly what we know so far. We're going to have a look at what the data shows us, and then we're going to look at some non-quantifiable aspects to this whole, I guess, kind of drama about what's actually going on, and see if we can put some of the pieces of the puzzle together to try and work out what's going on to gain an understanding of how this has all come about. So first of all, if we look at the market, if we just take a look at the price graphs of Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash. Now, Bitcoin Cash just in the last 24 hours up 19%. Now, this is after the pullback. Now, what I want you to focus on is just the shape of the graphs of Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash. Now, if you look, they're actually the inverse of one another. So what that tends to essentially lend credence to is money's coming out of Bitcoin and flowing into Bitcoin Cash. So we're going to have a look at some other data to support that. So first of all, let's just have a look at the global charts, or the dominance. Now, what we can see here, if we have a look as of just 2 days ago, we can start to see a pullback of Bitcoin, the market dominance of Bitcoin. And in the green down here, we can see the increase in dominance of Bitcoin Cash. Now, again, if you were to overlay these two or flip one, they are nearly the direct inverse of one another. Now, a lot of people have been saying that perhaps there's FOMO driving this, or fear of missing out, and people are selling off their Bitcoin to buy Bitcoin Cash. Now, I think that's correct to a degree. However, I personally believe that's only a small percentage of the overall market that is actually doing that. And I'll explain why. The purple line here represents Ethereum, and the other lines here represent some of the altcoins. Now, if we actually have a look at some of those other lines, they're relatively flat, which means that the money in those particular coins, or those large market capital coins, is barely moving in response to the events. It's Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash. Really, it's nearly a direct one-to-one correlation, maybe plus or minus 5 or 10% variance. But money is coming out of Bitcoin and going into Bitcoin Cash. So that would lead me to believe that people with large holdings of Bitcoin are selling that Bitcoin to buy Bitcoin Cash. And I think the data supports that theory. Now, if we just have a look at Bitcoin itself, we can see the volume was about $8.6 billion in the last 24 hours. Absolutely massive amounts of trading volume. If we have a look at Bitcoin Cash, we have a volume of 7.9 billion. Very similar, very similar, within about 10% of the volume of Bitcoin itself. Again, lending credibility to the reasoning of the volumes are the same, because cash, or Bitcoin, is being sold to buy Bitcoin Cash. As we can see here, Bitcoin Cash has just had a meteoric rise. Absolutely huge amounts of volume being bought of Bitcoin Cash just really in the last day or two. Absolutely huge. Now, for those maybe new to the cryptocurrency scene, if you owned Bitcoin before Bitcoin Cash was created or forked back in August, you would get equivalent in Bitcoin Cash. So if you had 1,000 Bitcoins, which is a lot of Bitcoin, you would have 1,000 Bitcoin Cash. So holders, large holders that had large quantities of Bitcoin before that fork, would have the equivalent in Bitcoin Cash, strategically placing them in a very interesting area. Basically, having that much of both would allow them to have leverage in terms of market forces, and being able to essentially impact the market in certain ways. Now, what happened yesterday was Bitcoin Cash, the total market capital actually surpassed that of Ethereum, what people called the flippening. It only happened for a very short time. We actually see the creator of Ethereum, Vitalik Buterin, weighing in on this and actually saying congratulations to Roger Ver, Jihan Wu, and this last person, Dedelnix, who I actually don't know. But I found this interesting that such a small amount of people were congratulated for such a large event. You can read into that in multiple ways. There's multiple layers to interpreting this, but just an observation for me, interesting that such a small amount of people have been congratulated for such a big event. Again, read into that however you want. So interestingly, if we just come back to Bitcoin Cash, look at the markets, a large portion of the volume is coming out of Korea. Now we see 23% here, and down here on Coin One, see 6.7%. Now this is now, yesterday it was far higher. In fact, I recall seeing, I think around 60% of the volume coming out of Korea just from one exchange. And actually there was rumors that the exchange in Korea suffered a DDoS attack and the exchange was actually taken out of service for a short amount of time. Quite interesting. Now, there's actually a tweet here from the Crypto Korean saying that the most hot search terms in Korean search engine, the number one was Bitcoin Cash. So this is basically the equivalent to Google in the West. So it says here that clear at the peak of the bubble, the OGs in Korea frequently say sell if a coin makes it to the top of that search. So just an interesting observation and supports the fact that a lot of this trading is coming out of South Korea. So what might be causing this? What could be the background? What could be the driving forces? What could be the political motivations? What could be, why is this happening? Because it certainly doesn't feel like organic, natural market growth. Such a large volume in such a short amount of time seems strategic to me. So let's just have a look at some of the information out there and see what we can find. And I'll present this in a way to help you form your own opinion. So we have a tweet here from Tony Vase saying hindsight is always 20/20, but basically this is some really spooky stuff. So an article has been found that alludes to the fact that the Bitcoin fork, the recent Bitcoin fork that was called off, which was the SegWit2x fork, and then the rise in Bitcoin Cash as it has over the last day or two, was forecasted or was predicted in some way, lending basically credence to the fact that this may have been a planned event. Now what he's saying here, that the pump of Bitcoin Cash to replace Bitcoin as the SegWit2x gets cancelled last minute, and the big blockers, which is Bitcoin Cash, because Bitcoin Cash has larger blocks, colluded with exchanges to dump. Now let's just have a look at the original article and go through it. Now basically it's coming from someone anonymous, and the interesting part of this is that this article was actually pasted or was provided on July the 30th, so a few months ago, well before all these recent events. What it essentially says is that this was all planned, okay? It says that basically the big blockers or the Bitcoin Cash colluded and joined forces. The Chinese Jihan and Co. that own a large portion that own huge mining companies come together to put a plan to replace Bitcoin with Bitcoin Cash. Now it goes on to say that some Chinese miners organized with exchanges to support and launch Bitcoin Cash. Initially, they basically wanted everyone to sell and they would accumulate Bitcoin Cash. Now basically then goes on to say that the plan was to sell large quantities of Bitcoin, buy large quantities of Bitcoin Cash, drive the price up, and try and replace the forked Bitcoin Cash, as the original Bitcoin, or try and basically try and flip it. Now, it's quite interesting. One of the events they actually say is going to happen here is that a lot of the hashing power would go to Bitcoin Cash. Now, before we go into that, this is a very interesting article, and like I do in every video, every single article will be in the description below, and I highly recommend you go and read it yourself and look into it further. So if this prediction is true, and the crazy thing is a lot of what is actually said in this article has actually come to pass, what are the motivations? So let's just say media attention. Let's just say this is true. They want to replace the original Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash. They're going to want to get the word out there. They're going to want to get this in the media. They're going to want to get it attention, essentially, eyes on it. They want eyes on it. So first article here, Bitcoin is in wild upheaval after the cancellation of the SegWit2x fork. Now, long story short, it has gotten a lot of attention, and we'll just quickly look at a couple of articles to indicate that. Now it says here, profoundly, Bitcoin Cash's hash rate or network-wide cryptographic processing power has surpassed Bitcoin's. So just as this kind of memo actually indicated would happen, has actually happened. So a lot of the miners that were mining Bitcoin have moved to Bitcoin Cash. Interestingly. Now another two articles, one from Forbes, Bitcoin Cash skyrockets, Bitcoin price drops as civil war continues. So interestingly, even though this is getting media attention, the media are reporting on the fact that it seems like there's some strategic maneuvering within the market going on. We have another article here, CoinDesk, confusion and euphoria as Bitcoin Cash surges past 30 billion. Now, for those that didn't sell their Bitcoin Cash, they were in Bitcoin earlier, happy days. People who predicted this, people who put a bet on this, happy days. You've obviously done very well. And my hat off to you if you have. But interestingly, this is getting the media attention they want. If it's perhaps not the media attention that they intended on getting in terms of the context, but it's getting attention nonetheless. So very interesting. This is basically what we know so far. There are many layers to this. My interpretation, a lot of politics, a lot of politics and a lot of strategy. I hope I've presented this to you in a way to help you form your own opinion. Who knows what's going to happen? We just need to keep an eye on it. But I'm just going to leave you with this before we finish. This is Google Trend Search for Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash. The blue line represents Bitcoin, the red line, Bitcoin Cash. You take from that what you want. So guys, I hope you enjoyed. I'm Bo. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.